Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Welcome back to the show, people. I'm back on my hate-dom grind set. Yeah, it's so good to be back. We're going to do a much shorter round for you guys, and basically, I'm just gonna be spitballing the whole time. You see, after giving Yugioh Vrains the fattest of wanks possible, in my doorstep, Ice Queendom dropped, and people were debatably happy about it. But we're not going to talk about the freaking online drama bullshit. We're just going to have a much more chill discussion about the first 3 episodes, what do I think about it, and what are my overall thoughts on it. But to get this shit out of the way, I guess in terms of my overall verdict of the show thus far, structurally it's better than Volume 1, which is what these 3 episodes kind of encapsulate, but it's much less enjoyable. Mainly because the show isn't really all that funny, and aside from the Sakuga money shots, the animation isn't as expressive or consistently eye-catching as the original was.
Just like every RWBY volume past Volume 3.
I can tell that if you're not into RWBY, and if you're not an obsessed freak like yours truly, you're not gonna get a whole lot out of revisiting Volume 1
from a studio that can do better and knows it.
So from here on out, I'm just going to be spitballing my thoughts about the first 3 episodes, what they did right, what they did wrong, and what I found interesting. Okay, enjoy the show. So yeah, if I'm not as incredibly quippy or anything with this video, it's because, you know, I'm mostly going off script for this. If you want my overall thoughts, I'm probably gonna say in the end and add a time card for it if you really don't want me to talk out of my ass for the next, I don't know, 30-40 minutes. Listen, I managed to bitch about Ren and Nora for literally an hour and a minute's worth of time. Holy crap. So if I can do that, I could probably make something out of this. So episode 1, and I wrote down a bunch of notes, so we're just gonna go through them. Starting out, the opening animation and narration, pretty good, especially with the Japanese VA for presumably Salem. The music for the scene with RWBY visiting Summer's grave, yeah, it's not very good. I don't like it very much. It sounds too upbeat. Like, I get that you can't have it be super somber all the time, especially since this is a reality RWBY and presumably Yang has grappled with for most of their lives. But good God, man, the one scene of RWBY having any sort of relation to Summer in like the past, I don't know, few volumes since like Volume 3 and like, I don't know, it's undercut with this weird music. I don't like it. It doesn't sound very good, it's not very cinematic, but it does have its good point in regards to just showing that RWBY still cares about Summer, she is a relevant part of her story, and how she engages with the world. That's still nice. And it's made even better because Yang finally acknowledges her as her mother. Like, we actually get a little bit of insight to her feelings about her in the first volume, which I have no idea why they didn't do that originally, but here we are, people. And you know, that little wink that she made to her grave, that was really nice. You know, it was simple, effective, you know, conveyed her emotions and just, you know, how she feels about Summer as a mother, much more and much better than how she mentioned her in Volume 2 with burning the candle. Unlike in Volume 1, the first episode is going to utilize the black and white trailer, but RWBY's and Yang's trailers are skipped, which makes sense because those two are much more story relevant. Blake's because it basically drives the plot of Volume 1, despite the show being called RWBY, but fuck it. And Weiss because, well, as we'll get to later, we are going to focus a lot more on Weiss throughout this show and her internal conflicts with the stuff surrounding her character, which has its plus sides and downsides, as I'll get to in a minute. In a lot of ways, yeah, it's kind of heavy-handed in regards to just like Jacques and Whitley being dicks to Weiss and everything, but hey, at the very least, we establish them as characters and their relevance to Weiss's story earlier on, which already puts it leagues above Volume 1 just from that alone. Because with that, we can use that as a framing device going forward. Not to say that they needed to establish all those characters, like have us actually see them in the first volume, but this is a very simple and effective way of doing that if you don't want to try too hard. Also, while I did like the scene again, what was it? God, it was so stupid. I hated how, like, Winter, I guess it's fine because she's a super soldier, so fuck it. But like Jacques, Whitley, and Klein are just not behind any sort of protective wall while they have this armored Grim in their midst. Like, what? What are they planning on doing if Weiss wasn't able to do anything? Like I said, we're focusing a lot on Weiss's story here, which this brings me to the conceit of Ice Queendom as a story and how that is in relation to the show proper, which is that, and a friend, Night Hunter, mentioned this to me. Why in the absolute hell is this about Weiss? Like, of all the characters that we needed more characterization on, we needed Weiss. I don't understand. Like, except for a couple of aspects, Weiss is literally the best out of the main four, just for the fact that the show actively, consistently, up until volume 7 and 8, actually put her through character development. And for the most part, we got a pretty good idea about her character. We can improve some areas, sure, but having to reframe an entire spin-off dedicated to her instead of fixing RWBY by doing the same thing, assuming that they can actually do this well, which that in of itself has yet to be seen here, but you get my point. Not to say you can't focus on RWBY as well, which is why their story, for the most part, is left untouched, and have even added a tiny bit of detail to it, which we'll get to in a minute. After that, we get a scene of RWBY going into a city that is presumably in Patch. I mean, it's all still in Vale anyway, so let's just call it Patch City or something. And she's out there, as opposed to the original where she's just out there just randomly. She's going there to find a gift for Yang, which is good. It's a nice way of further tying together that, like, I think I forgot to say this earlier, but RWBY was congratulating Weiss on getting in a beacon, which we didn't get to see originally, which is also good, and establishes her insecurity about her not being as good as her as well, which granted doesn't last very long, but it's still nice to see. In fact, we get a tiny bit more interaction with Yang, Taiyang, and RWBY here, like with a cutaway that they had where they talk about RWBY growing up and all this other stuff. The dialogue isn't all that great, but it's still nice. Not to mention, when the Torchwitch stuff happens, and when the Dust Cell and the police come, Taiyang and Yang actually go to the scene to find her, which is good, you know, and they're even in like a pseudo police station, you know, just waiting for her to come out, which is nice. It gives them further relevance. Sometimes it's about the simple things. You know what line I also don't like? When Glinda says, "You think your aura can block every shot? Mr. Potter, how dare you?" Oh, man. I don't know why I instantly thought of that shit. Oh, man. Klein showing more care for Weiss is also good, but I have no idea why they didn't have his alternate personality show up. It's really weird, and I doubt it would take that much animation to do, but who knows, maybe they were trying to do this to preemptively keep themselves from paying J. Michael Tatum from having more lines. There's a brief, tiny, like, blink and you'll miss it scene where RWBY puts flowers on Summer's grave before she heads off the beacon. And, yeah, again, that's really sweet. It gives further relevance to Summer as a part of RWBY's motivation, which already they're doing more with that connection than I can't talk. Much like how Rooster Teeth can't write. They can't write RWBY's connection to Summer worth a damn, and that's why this scene is good. So yeah, that's it for episode 1. Where are we at with this recording? Fuck. It's almost 20 minutes already. God, this thing might actually be an hour. Fuck. So the structure of this episode kinda sorta has its pros and cons, because it meshes together, like right from the beginning, it meshes together the scene on the plane that we see in like episode 2 of volume 1. It meshes together like some of the ending parts of that episode as well, and the beginning of episode 3, which is an interesting choice, and it actually kinda works. Because you would think that there are a lot of interactions that would logically happen better on the plane, on the character's way to Beacon, as opposed to when they touch down. This is actually a very smart choice, because it makes the set design a lot more lively, things a lot more lived in. And it gets right to the point of just establishing who the characters are, what their attitudes are, what their motivations are, and how they interact with each other. Like, that's really, really good. For example, Weiss considering taking Pyrrha on as a partner makes absolute sense for her to do so on the plane, as opposed to her just doing that when she touches down. Because not only does this establish her mindset, her bit of opportunism, but it also shows a bit more of that, that willpower Weiss has, where she's being proactive about how she wants things to go. And it also establishes Pyrrha's importance earlier on than the original show did, which is also great. Although this also runs the problem of why the hell isn't everyone and their goddamn grandmother trying to ask out Pyrrha to be on their team as well? Like, you would think that they would be swarming all over the chick that has won like several tournaments and been on fucking cereal boxes, right? Like, it's like if freaking Tony the Tiger was real and everybody was just, I don't know, like in the zoo. Like, they were just going to the zoo and Tony the Tiger is like on one of those like tour trucks. Like, everybody's on like a tour truck with Tony the Tiger and nobody's just batting an eye whatsoever, except for like the one 10-year-old that wants his autograph. Like, how the fuck does that work, dude? But yeah, other than that, this scene does a good job of demonstrating what I'm talking about. In fact, this keeps the ball rolling, because while Yang and RWBY are talking and RWBY's being like, I'm not sure about like interacting with people, instead of Yang literally abandoning her sister to like fend herself, this 16-year-old girl who clearly needs help socially interacting with people, we call back to the scene of like Taiyang and Yang talking about how RWBY needs to grow, and Yang, being the protective sister that she is, she pushes RWBY while she's still with her to interact with Blake, which is much, much better. That's like literally a running theme with these string of episodes. They do a much better job portraying Yang and RWBY as sisters than Rooster Teeth has ever done since Volume 1. That is insane to me. And it's also great because it leads to them using the interaction between, RWBY and Yang that they usually had later in Volume 1 when they were having that sleepover thingy. Because they couldn't get into their dorm rooms, apparently, for whatever reason. I don't. But it's a lot better at establishing that. And that immediately leads to Weiss and Blake coming into blows. Because right after that, then there's like a news report about the White Fang going on. And Yang and RWBY actually comment on it. Like, they share their opinions about the faunus racism crap and the SDC, the Schnee Dust Company. That is... oh my god! Dude, I immediately just popped the biggest fucking stiffy when I saw that scene. Because it automatically makes this volume so much better. Like, it makes no sense for RWBY and Yang to not give a shit about any of that. But that immediately leads to the scene where Weiss and those three characters come to blows. Like, this is their first meeting. And it's good. I mean, the dialogue isn't great, but the fact that it's structured this way already puts it so far ahead of the first volume, because it kind of felt like it was dragging its heels half the time. But in this case, it's good, because again, it establishes the dynamics and the pieces of the a pub pebble? Like a pebble you find in a freaking bar or some shit? Oh my god. But like... what was I saying? The piece of the puzzle. Thank you. Because again, the White Fang stuff is probably at its most relevant in Volume 1. So having the characters actually comment on this is, like basic as fuck storytelling. But listen, man, basic storytelling for this show is like a 7 out of 10 in their context, okay? But yeah, that immediately leads to Weiss having issues with the White Fang, which, Blake confronts with, and RWBY trying to sort of de-escalate the situation. The only weakness I would say, well, one weakness, and another one I just thought of just now, is that we removed that cute interaction that Jean and RWBY had in regards to their weapons, which is, again, pretty unfortunate, because that's one of the very few interactions, especially in regards to establishing the world and RWBY as a character, that I just really liked. It's her love for weapons, and, Jean being kind of self-conscious about his place in Beacon and shit like that in a much more, very natural way, which could have been much better if they actually built anything off of that, but fuck it. But yeah, the only other big weakness is that the directing in this show, for the most part, isn't all that good, so I wouldn't be surprised if most people's eyes were kind of glazing over during this scene. Get a little peep at Shion Zaiden, the new character, the new totally original character, Do Not Steal, being introduced in the show when everybody's about to take their, force test. Which, can I just say, why the fuck does she look like I don't know, like a sickly eggplant? Like an eggplant that has just been out in the sun too long and it's just molding in different places. Like, I'm not a big fan of her design at freaking all. But we'll talk more about her probably in a few minutes. Jean actually telling his teammates what to do in their fight automatically puts him above Volume 1 Jean, in my opinion. Like, seriously, that shit always bothered me. Like, he just yelled, Pura! And he doesn't even tell her what to do. Pura just instantly knows to cut off the Deathstalker's stinger. So, Jean actually tells her in this version, which literally took 2 fucking seconds to do. I don't know why they didn't do that, but it's great that they fixed that here. Oh yeah, this show's version of Badge and the Burden, which if you don't know, it's the episode where RWBY and Weiss, really go into blows, I don't really like very much. And it's mainly because of one very specific scene. Or more so, one very specific scene that they decided to either skip or basically take out entirely. So we know how the scene usually goes. RWBY and the others are taking a Grim class, and Weiss volunteers to fight the Borbatusk in front of the bathroom. In front of the bathroom, holy shit, she would get creamed. Phrasing. Wait, I didn't mean that. That wasn't on purpose. Sorry, I'm anyways, fuck. In front of the classroom, RWBY tries to encourage Weiss, to fight. She's cheering and all that crap, and it distracts Weiss that she isn't able to focus properly. Problem is that RWBY only intervened 2 times during that whole scene, as opposed to the multiple times, or maybe once or 2 more times that she did in the original, which I feel is a big mistake. And this will go into the problem I have with Badge and the Burden as an episode, which probably deserves a video on its own, but fuck it, I'll mention it here. The problem with Badge and the Burden in the original has to do with the fact that RWBY, especially throughout the volume in general, does not develop from that experience. Yes, we do get her talking to Ozpin, and Ozpin tells her, hey, you gotta be a good leader. But by the end of the episode, RWBY doesn't really do anything to try to prove herself. And at the very end of the volume, she ends up basically being a non-entity aside from meeting Penny. Literally the only characters that did anything in the final episode of the volume was Penny, Blake, and Sun. The show called RWBY didn't have the main heroes, RWBY, do anything in regards to the main story. That's like making a show about the freaking Avengers and have the final episode where the X-Men do something instead. That doesn't work. That doesn't make sense. So that's the problem with the original show, and they exacerbate it here by taking out the number of times, by lowering the number of times that RWBY intervened, interjected during when Weiss is fighting the Borbatusk, because it removes just that much more responsibility from her shoulders than she already did, which from the show's standpoint, again, is insanely small. Like, by the end, Weiss was the one who had to go across the aisle to change, and RWBY was all like, okay. But they make it even worse here, because RWBY only cheered Weiss on in the beginning when they were about to fight, and then when there was a bit of a lull in that fight where Weiss, wasn't really doing anything, just getting ready for her next move, that's when RWBY gave her that tip about hitting it in its stomach, right? But the problem is that those are the only times that happened, and they were monumentally much more helpful than she was in the original. Way less annoying. Now you could say, yeah, but this is on top of like Weiss's already established grievances with RWBY. Well, here's the problem. Now it makes her grievances way less justified. Instead of it actually being, a part of the whole thing, that it can even produce the illusion that both characters need to change. It's only Weiss that changes as a result of that experience. And even then, not all that much, because, we talk about her racism later. But we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, it's just... I don't know. Like, that episode, to me, is one of the early volume episodes that really screwed the pooch on RWBY's development as a character. And instead of doing anything to fix that, like they have been able to fix so many other things before, they just somehow made it worse, because I guess they needed to skip over it for the sake of time. Which really sucks. Speaking of sucking, we're skipping over Jaundice. But the beginning of Jaundice is used as a framing device to establish the Nightmare Grim, and how this new chick, this new pro-huntsman, Shion Zaiden, does things. So basically, she is a nightmare hunter who specializes in fighting this type of Grim. Which, can I just say, I just absolutely love that we actually get to see a pro-huntsman that is specialized in fighting Grim, if not a certain type of Grim, and is actually, somewhat competent at her job. Good lord, it is such a breath of fresh air. Granted, I'm going to ruin that praise in just a moment, but it's still so good. So the Nightmare Grim, the way she describes it, is a parasite kind of Grim, where it latches on to the target, drains them of their aura, makes them tired, and basically kills them. A bit similar to the Apathy Grim. And presumably Jean and Weiss, because of course Weiss gets infected with this, got infected with those things while they were in the forest test, which we'll get to in a moment. So Zaiden has this little suitcase, which turns into like a weird fax machine / phone / sewing kit, which she presumably uses her semblance in order to transfer Jean's teammates into his dream, which is so freaking weird with the way that it works. I'm guessing it's her semblance that allows her to do this. So if the Grim dies in the dream, that causes them to break out of the target, which, okay, that's one thing, but I'm so weirded out by how this thing even works. Zaiden explained that, hey, I can't go into his dream. Pyrrha, Ren, and Nora have to go into Jean's dream because they're much more closer to Jean than she is. So they have a higher probability of success, or his dreams would do less in resisting them. Which is a interesting idea on its own, but I don't know, what would happen it makes me instantly question. So what about if the target isn't a huntsman and don't have huntsman friends? You know what I mean? What if some shopkeeper got infected with this Grim? Does Shion just give up? Does she walk away, or does she go into the dream herself? Presumably the latter, because otherwise, the person's just gonna die. And I get, it would be so good if they just explain it a tiny bit more, which wouldn't really be all that much time to do. I don't know, it's just so weird. I guess it's like the proclivities of her semblance. I mean, semblances can do whatever the fuck the plot demands it. So, if they have it to where that, Zayden can communicate with whoever is inside of the dream, but somehow she uses technology in order to channel that, I really, really don't know. Maybe it's like dust control or some shit like that. It's so weird, but we do get a little bit of like Jean's dream, which is obviously him being self-conscious because of like his family line and shit, which barely gets fleshed out in the original or here. And speaking of lack of fleshing out, while I do appreciate them skipping over Jean-ness, and while I understand them kind of abridging how Pura and the others like break Jean out of his nightmare, in a way, it kind of does a disservice to the potential of his character, as well as better establishing how dangerous and how soul-crushing the experience of being under the nightmare actually is. Like, of course we're going to be focusing on Weiss being under this same exact affliction probably in the next episode or two, right? Like, that only makes sense. But without establishing it here in the plot, where it'd be probably at its most relevant, it makes it seem like the nightmare just doesn't really seem all that hard. So instead of something being challenging and getting more challenging as the show goes on, we're just going from freaking easy mode to critical mode, like at the drop of a freaking hat. Which, on one hand, is seriously ironic, because again, the way Jean takes up so much time in Volume 1 is an absolute crime, while on the other hand, it's like, dude, oh my god, even he doesn't deserve this. I mean, Jean, oh my god, you know what they did? They make him a narrative jobber. That's so funny. But what isn't funny is this line that Zayden says right after that whole thing is over and done with. Which is, she says, I sensed other nightmares in the forest too. So she knows that there are probably more of these type of Grimm in the forest where the characters are fighting in the second episode. She knows that there is a high probability that RWBY and the others are probably afflicted with the same Grimm virus thing. But she doesn't do anything except tell them to stay vigilant or stay diligent, whatever the fuck. It's so stupid. Why don't you just, like, if there's physical signs, and we know there's physical signs for when somebody's infected with this Grimm, you know, they have this sort of like black ick all over them. You know, the venom. So it's easy to tell. So why doesn't she just go through all of the characters, have them strip, and then just, if one of them has the Grimm, they immediately try to take care of that right away? Why don't they do that? Why doesn't she do that? That doesn't make sense. Well, of course, because if she did that, we wouldn't have a story. But I don't know. They could have done a much better way of doing this for Weiss. But I'm just not sure. But hey, at the very least, they fixed up a bit of like one of the last couple episodes, which is that during Weiss's bout of racism, RWBY and Yang actually contribute to the conflict. RWBY, for one thing, RWBY points out that, you know, while Weiss is saying that, oh, the White Fang are criminals, they're probably the ones who robbed that shop or whatever they were visiting. And RWBY was all like, I don't know, man, humans can do bad shit too. You know, right before I got in the beacon, I had to fight human gangsters and some shit. Which is a good way of of using RWBY as a way to frame Weiss's arguments in a negative light. And comments on previous events that just gives her a very believable response. That's pretty good. Not to mention Yang talking back at Weiss and calling her a bigot is a million times better than her literally being a non-entity in the first volume. Like, Ice Queendom Yang isn't as funny as Volume 1 Yang, but I will take this over any version of Yang that we see going forward. She is way, way, way better as a character here than she probably has been for like the past 7 years. And this is great because this makes Weiss's turn to try to, patch things up with Blake later much more believable. Because Yang is literally calling her out on her bullshit, and it's so good. Granted, there's one part where Weiss is like crying about like how things aren't working out the way that she wanted them to, and it's played off for kind of a laugh. And I think that's just really fucking stupid. I have no idea why they did that. It kind of undercuts that whole conflict a little bit. But for the most part, it works fine. Especially in regards to the ending of the episode, which establishes the nightmare, but also the idea that she hasn't fully gotten over all this stuff in regards to the White Fang and Faunus, Her war on furries hasn't ended yet, people. Which, essentially, I guess, kicks off the Ice Queendom arc, as it were. And as many as my problems I have with it, I'm actually interested to see where they go with it. Because potentially, this could be a great way of, at the very least, fleshing out one part of Weiss's character that, upon recollection, hadn't gotten as much attention as it definitely should have. And that is her feelings about the Faunus and all that shit. Because she gets over that literally in like 2 episodes, and she never comments on it again, except for when somebody else is being bigoted, which is very few and very far between. And that is really dumb. You don't just get over that kind of thing. So if that is going to actually be fleshed out in this version of the story, I'm all for it. Even if it's done poorly, I'm at the very least interested to see what exactly they do with it. So yeah, that's the first 3 episodes of Ice Queendom. Is it better than the first volume? Fuck yeah! Does it have a lot of interesting things to talk about? Yeah, absolutely. But do I think it's good overall? Not really. I mean, no duh. We're still using, it's Studio Wit's skin suit, but it's still Volume 1 skeleton, people. You can't fix that unless you overhaul the entire story from the ground up. And of course, as a result of rushing most of the events of the volume, they still keep almost all of the same problems. But, I don't know, I probably, I think I gave, the first volume of RWBY, a 5. I would probably give this a 5.5. I mean, it's an improvement to be sure. And either way, I'm in this shit for the long haul. I want to see where they go from here. I can totally understand them just, bumming out on the first 3 episodes just to get to the shit that they actually want to get to. And if that thing is good, then all the power to it from there. So, yeah, I guess that's about it. You guys are free. You're no longer my hostages. And I'm totally going to work on a non-RWBY video. Totally. 100%. Please don't hold me to that. Anyway, this has been Kaiser Shonen, and join me next time when we talk about Weiss becoming a anti-furry dominatrix.